Hello, I'm Michael Peter Langevin. This is my latest book, if we can get the lights right, Travel Tales from Unknown Realities. And I've been reading the chapters in hopes of eventually turning it into an audiobook. Today, we're at chapter 3. Thank you for joining me. The Dead Never Rest. By the time I was a junior in high school, I had begun helping my father with funerals. I was 13. It was not many months later that I started having the weirdest dreams of my young life. They were like hurricanes of ghosts and voices speaking in many different languages, trying to tell me things and demanding things I could not understand. The dreams went on for over a week. I was exhausted during the days, but afraid to sleep at night. I thought I was going mad. There were no explanations in any of the magical books I had purchased. I began praying for the dreams to stop and for my sanity to return. Then one night, a well-dressed man in old-fashioned clothes appeared to me. He spoke, but at first I could not hear his words. Dreams, again and still, were like hurricanes, just like the ones before. Eventually, by managing to focus upon him, I made out his words. He said, "I am Phineas Goodhue. I have come and volunteered to be the spokesman for the bones. All the many spirits connected with your collection of bones were in various states of afterlife decisions. But by taking their bones away from the sacred ground, you have disrupted their spiritual journeys. They have been trying to communicate with you, but you were unequipped to understand. You must rebury the bones that they may all return to their afterlife decisions." "What if I don't?" I said in the dream. "Then you will go insane worse than you have been this week, and you will never return," replied Phineas. Now, I hadn't had any astral travel experiences, nor lucid dreamings at this point in my young life, so I'm not sure where my ability to communicate with Phineas came from. But I said, "What do I get if I return the bones?" Phineas looked at me and he said, "I need to know what you want." I said, "I want magical knowledges, mystical experiences. I want to understand of ghosts and spirits and the unknown. I want to have a magical life." Phineas didn't hesitate. He said, "Then we have a deal. Rebury the bones." Now, let's back up a little. I am the son of a funeral director and the grandson of a funeral director. When I was only 5, my father brought me down to the funeral home where he had a dead corpse on the embalming table. He said, "If you're going to be a funeral director, you need to become comfortable with death. Touch the body." I cried, "No, I don't want to." Now, my father was an officer in World War II in North Africa. He'd been wounded twice, gotten 2 Purple Hearts. He was not someone that most people argued with. Even at 5, I knew better. I stopped my crying. I reached out and I touched the corpse. To this day, I don't know if it was my imagination, if something physical or esoteric happened, what the nature of it was, but it felt as if an electrical shock beyond description passed through my fingers, my arm, into my heart. In my young mind, I suddenly knew and experienced the void of death. In my heart, I knew wordless awareness of existence, and then about going away. I wondered what it would be like when my parents and my siblings were all dead. What would I experience when my time came to pass? I felt a comradeship with death. I understood it was what gave my life meaning. And with this knowledge, I always would, have the meaning and the awareness of death, and it would goad me on to live life fully. Now, my two older brothers were meant to be, according to my father's decision, funeral directors as well. They were 8 and 10 years older than me. And as they entered their teens, they became musicians and Casanovas. They came to returning home later and later until some nights not at all. My father would usually have a helper that he could call to help him retrieve bodies and bring them to the funeral home. For his back was weak from the war wounds. But sometimes at 1, 2, or 3 in the morning, he could get no one. So he would wake me and say, "Michael, I need your help." Now, we lived in Methuen and Lawrence, Massachusetts, old mill towns. They had built many 3, and 4-story tenements with no elevators and very thin staircases that wove through the buildings. We had to go to the 3rd and 4th floor and strap a body onto my back so that I could bring them down the stairs and to the hearse, where we would load them up, bring them to the funeral home, unload them. I would help my father embalm them. Then he would give me a ride back to our farm. I would wash up, eat breakfast, and sure enough, go to school on the bus with the other kids. I would drowsily look around the classroom and say to myself, none of these kids had to wake up in the middle of the night, retrieve bodies, embalm them before they could come to school. It's not fair. For most of my school years, I was an unofficial apprentice in my father's funeral home. I also worked other jobs like Grove Street clerk, lawn cutting, yard work. But when my father was shot at home, I always pitched in. One night, we had a terrible New England snowstorm. We used to call them northeasters because they came from the northeast across the Atlantic Ocean. They brought water, great amounts of moist snow, and the winds were fierce. This particular night, my father had retrieved the body and needed to go and get another one 60 miles south of Boston. He had called me and asked me to come down and embalm the body that he had already gotten. I'll always remember that body. He was named Walter Tobias. My father had picked up Walter earlier that evening and had not been able to find the time to embalm him. I still remember the howling winds and heavy snows falling as I walked slowly to the funeral home, slipping and sliding down the narrow streets. At 11 in the evening, I was alone in the funeral home, and I had taken to smoking cigars when I embalmed. At a young age, I smoked cigars, but the smell of embalming fluids and body fluids required something. I left the morgue to go get matches to light my cigar. When I returned, the dead body of Walter was sitting up with the most hateful look upon his face. It was as if he was saying, "I'm not dead, and you should be. You should be. I will get you." I had seen many scary things and upsetting things in my youth, but this made me scream, and I ran out of the morgue. When I returned, I went to my father's private office, where he had his old desk and the couch he would sleep on when he had to stay nights to set things up early in the morning. I went straight to his mahogany liquor cabinet. Here he kept his brandy and his top of the line cognac. I poured myself a glass of my father's best cognac to calm my nerves and strengthen my resolve. There was no noise coming from Walter in that morning. I made my decision and walked back to Walter. Obviously, the coroner had pronounced Walter dead, but I knew that pronouncing someone dead was not always an exact art. The look on Walter's face was extremely intimidating, let's say. "You are dead, right, Walter?" I said. There was no answer. So I touched Walter's arm and discovered that it was cold as ice. I put my hand on his chest and found no heartbeat. I slapped his face lightly, but there was no response. After leaning close to his mouth, feeling no burn, I was finally convinced Walter was really dead. The tradition of the wake had originated from the need to give people a fighting chance to show that they weren't alive, or were alive, as the case may be. Later, funeral directors took the coroner's word because the methods had improved so much that someone being dead was easily testable. Still, I was convinced that Walter was undoubtedly dead. I pushed him back down. Of course, I knew about rigor mortis. I had seen corpses whose fingers twitched and whose arms moved, but this was more extreme. Nonetheless, I assured myself that Walter was dead, and that it was rigor mortis and nothing else. Just as I managed to calm myself, there was a noise in the other room. I jumped almost out of my skin. The young man who often helped my father around the funeral home, Gene, had brought another corpse my father had called him to pick up. Gene asked me to help him get the corpse out of the car, and we carried him to the morgue table. Gene stayed not at a minute more than he needed to because of the terrible weather outside. So then I was alone again, with two corpses now. The storm was getting worse. Even though the morgue lacked windows and had thick walls, I could hear the winds howling outside. I decided to embalm the new body first and let Walter's body settle for sure. I turned part of me still filled with fear that he might be alive. I glanced at Walter, and the look on his face had not changed, but at least he was lying down. His look sent a chill up my spine. I turned back to the new corpse named Tom and began embalming. It used to take me about an hour to embalm a body, depending on the specific challenges. Just as I was finishing up on Tom, there was movement behind me. I turned. Walter had sat up again. I yelled out in fear. In my hands, I had held the sharp tool used for pumping fluids out of the body and putting embalming fluids back in. And I always thought it seemed to resemble a short spear. I seriously considered stabbing Walter right in the chest, but my profession was not allowed. I put the tool down, pushed Walter back, and rechecked all his vital signs, each one of these 3 times. When I finally convinced myself over again what I already knew, I began embalming Walter's body. I had to work hard to adjust the expression on his face. When I had finished, I washed both bodies, dressed them in the clothes their families had sent, and moved them into their caskets. I sat down, still a bit shaken, and settled my nerves. I had another glass of my father's good cognac. Outside, the storm raged. My father called. He said he was about 20 miles away and that I should go home. It was getting late. He would embalm the last body that he was bringing. I bundled up and walked to the front door, opened it, and thought it was too bad a storm to walk home in. I was tempted to sleep on the couch until my father returned, but the thought of Walter kept me from doing that. I bundled up tighter, and eventually I managed to make my way through the snow-covered streets to our family farm, which was located next to a large number of old cemeteries. That night, I dreamed of the funeral home and about Walter and Tom. in their caskets. Walter had the same accusing look on his face in the dream. And I felt the same chill down my spine. Both Walter and Tom talked to me, and they were not happy. I felt strongly that they did not like me, even hated me, and wanted to hurt me. Their spirits floated out of their bodies, started flying around me. Walter kept saying, I did not want to die. I hate you for being alive. I can kill you. I woke up shaking and sweating, even though it was cold. I realized I had only slept a few hours, but I got up and fetched a glass of water. The familiar task of pouring water into a glass and swallowing the cool liquid in small sips calmed me. I told myself it had been a dream, and I went back to bed, hoping to dream about something more pleasant. But instead, the dreams came back worse than before. Now, there were many ghosts flying around me from the dream hall. Some I recognized as bodies I had embalmed in the past. I felt like they were all out to get me, howling at me. I felt deep fear. Walter's face kept coming back, as angry as it had been before. I woke up, afraid for my life. Then I thought of my father being alone with bodies and became afraid for him too. I went back to the funeral home, through the snowstorm, filled with apprehension. When I arrived, my father was snoring on the couch. So I made coffee and rechecked the bodies. They all seemed normal. When my father woke up, we arranged everything for the wake. I looked at the three dead bodies again. I could have sworn that the third body, which my father had driven so far to pick up, also had been in my dream. That deeply worried me. But they all are dead, I insisted to myself. I finally got up the nerve to tell my father about the corpse, sitting up with an ugly, mean look on its face. I told him about the dreams and that the three corpses had been in them. Michael, you will see strange things in this profession, many, more than you can imagine. You just have to get used to them. The strange dreams go away after a decade or so. I might go to church every Sunday, but I do not believe in heaven, hell, or ghosts. I decided sounded like an awful long time, a decade, to have bad dreams. But even if I believed my father, I would soon learn more about restless ghosts, about how to communicate with them. When I began helping my father at the funerals, we lived in New England, where the snow gets awful deep and the ground gets awful frozen. They dig up graves with backhoes. They often catch old caskets and spread the bones of old bodies over the snow. After noticing this, I took to returning and gathering up the bones after everyone had left the funeral. One of my brothers had given me a 50-gallon fish tank. And over the summer, I collected garden widow spiders. But come the cold weather, they had died off. So I took to filling it with human bones. I thought it was pretty cool. No one my age had a collection of human bones in their bedroom. It made me feel very eccentric and special. Something forbidden about it. As you know, I wasn't wrong. There was definitely things forbidden about it. I had not counted on the voices of the dead. As winter turned to spring, my terrarium filled. It was then that I began having the ghost spirit dreams. Meaning Phineas Goodhue changed my life, I think forever. But I had to keep to my end of the bargain. The same night I met Phineas, I fell into a deep sleep. After the encounter, my family went to church in the morning. They left me to sleep. I slept late because I could again, and I seldom did sleep that late. When I woke, I ran to the garage, got a burlap bag, put every crumb of human bone into the burlap bag, gathered up a spade, hiked through the woods to the back of one of the large cemeteries nearby, and spent 2 hours digging a very deep hole, in which I buried the bones. I placed the bones in the bottom and covered them up and put leaves on top of the fresh soil so no one would suspect. Now remember our deal. I have kept my part. I expect you to keep yours, I said, as I filled the hole with dirt. Now they can rest in sacred ground. I had no more dreams, like the fearful ones that almost drove me mad. I used a tank to keep garden snakes in spring. The snakes felt exotic enough, yet safe. A few months later, I was in the oldest part of another cemetery across the street from our farm, reading old tombstone poems. I found one I had never noticed before. The name on the tombstone was Phineas Goodhue. Remember me as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you must be. Prepare for death and follow me. I still think I hear Phineas Goodhue's voice on the edge of my consciousness from time to time, remembering our precious deal and how precious life is, and knocking me a little down this alley or towards that experience, which have filled my life with experiences like are in this book, Travel Tales from Unknown Realities. Enjoy, and thank you so much for joining me. We'll do chapter 4 when all the pieces come together.